It began with a promise that money could unite what history had divided. In 2002, when millions of Europeans lined up at banks and ATMs to exchange their francs, marks, liras, and drachmas for a single new currency, the mood was euphoric. The euro was more than a monetary reform. It was a declaration of peace after centuries of conflict. For the first time in history, nations that had fought each other through 2 world wars would now share the same coin. It was a vision of unity, stability, and prosperity, an economic miracle that would erase borders and rival the dollar. But beneath the celebration lay a question that few dared to ask. How can you share a currency without sharing a country? The story of the euro begins long before the first banknotes were printed. In the aftermath of World War II, Europe lay in ruins, its economies shattered, its currencies unstable, its political map fractured. From that devastation came a dream: integration. France and Germany, historic enemies, sought to bind their futures so tightly that war would become impossible. Economic cooperation was the tool. In 1957, the Treaty of Rome created the European Economic Community, laying the foundations for a single market. Over the following decades, tariffs fell, borders softened, and trade flourished. But by the 1980s, the system faced a problem: currency chaos. Each nation still controlled its own money, and exchange rates fluctuated wildly. The French franc rose, the Italian lira fell, the German mark dominated everything. For a continent seeking unity, monetary fragmentation was a constant reminder of division. In 1992, European leaders gathered in the Dutch city of Maastricht to attempt something revolutionary: a single currency governed by shared rules. The Maastricht Treaty set the conditions: low inflation, limited deficits, and stable debt levels. Those who met the criteria could join the new monetary union. The goal was noble, but the design was fragile. Politically, the euro was a leap of faith. Economically, it was a compromise. Nations would surrender control of their monetary policy to a new central authority, the European Central Bank, but they would keep control of their own budgets. In other words, Europe would have one currency but 19 fiscal policies. It was, as economists later warned, an incomplete house, beautiful from the outside, but missing a foundation. When the euro finally launched in 1999, optimism drowned out caution. The project's architects believed that shared money would force shared discipline. If Italy or Greece overspent, markets would punish them, encouraging reform. And for a while, the illusion held. The euro brought lower interest rates across southern Europe. Countries that had once paid double-digit borrowing costs now borrowed almost as cheaply as Germany. Capital poured southward into Spanish housing, Greek public spending, and Irish banking. For investors, lending within the Eurozone seemed risk-free. After all, everyone used the same currency. How could a European government ever default? But unity masked imbalance. Germany and the northern economies built export-driven surpluses, producing more than they consumed. Southern Europe, buoyed by cheap credit, consumed more than it produced. The single currency locked these economies together, eliminating the ability to adjust through exchange rates. In the old system, if Italy became uncompetitive, it could devalue the lira to regain balance. In the Eurozone, that option vanished. The only path to adjustment was internal, through wage cuts, spending cuts, and austerity. It was a structure that favored discipline over flexibility, creditors over debtors, and export nations over importers. The illusion of convergence shattered in 2008. When the global financial crisis struck, Europe's structural flaws were exposed. Banks across the continent had loaded up on risky assets, often tied to American subprime mortgages. When the bubble burst, the losses spread like a contagion. But what began as a banking crisis quickly became a sovereign debt crisis, especially in countries that had borrowed heavily during the boom. Greece was the first domino to fall. In 2009, its new government revealed that previous administrations had falsified budget data. The deficit was not 6% of GDP as claimed, but more than 12%. Investors panicked. Borrowing costs soared. By 2010, Greece was shut out of global markets. The Eurozone's great test had arrived. The European Union responded with rescue packages. The so-called Troika of the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund stepped in with loans conditioned on harsh austerity. Wages and pensions were slashed, taxes raised, and public assets sold. The Greek economy shrank by a quarter. Unemployment exceeded 25%. The same pattern soon repeated in Portugal, Ireland, Spain, and Cyprus. Each crisis was treated as a failure of national discipline rather than a flaw in the system itself. Northern Europe preached reform. Southern Europe endured depression. But the real disease was structural. The euro, by design, removed the ability to devalue or stimulate during recessions. What remained was pain without policy. By 2012, the euro seemed on the brink of collapse. Financial markets speculated that Greece, or even Italy, might leave the currency union. Then, in July of that year, European Central Bank President Mario Draghi delivered the three words that saved the project: whatever it takes. The ECB would buy bonds, guarantee stability, and backstop the system. Confidence returned, but at a price. Europe had avoided disintegration, but not stagnation. Growth remained weak, inflation persistently low. The Eurozone became a halfway house, too integrated to break apart, too divided to thrive. The deeper consequences were psychological. In countries like Germany, the crisis reinforced the belief that southern nations were reckless spenders. In the South, it bred resentment toward northern austerity. What was meant to unite Europe instead deepened its divides. Populist movements gained strength, from Syriza in Greece to the Five-Star Movement in Italy to the National Front in France. The promise of unity had become a source of distrust. Meanwhile, outside Europe, the United States and China recovered faster, using aggressive fiscal and monetary tools the Eurozone could not. The continent that invented modern capitalism found itself trapped by its own creation. In the 2020s, new challenges arrived. The pandemic forced the European Union to do what once seemed impossible: issue joint debt to finance recovery. For the first time, Europe shared fiscal risk. Yet even this historic step exposed lingering fractures. Germany and the Northern Bloc resisted deeper integration, while Southern nations argued that solidarity had come too late. Inflation surged after 2022, forcing the European Central Bank to raise rates, a policy that hit indebted countries hardest. Once again, the same imbalance returned. One currency, many economies, divergent realities. Today, the euro stands as both triumph and warning. It brought decades of price stability, facilitated trade, and gave Europe a political voice to rival the dollar and yuan. But it also institutionalized asymmetry, a system where prosperity in one region often depends on stagnation in another. For all its stability, the euro remains an unfinished project. Its architects built a monetary union without a fiscal union, a central bank without a shared treasury, and a common market without common sacrifice. The miracle of the euro was not that it worked perfectly, but that it survived its own contradictions. The lessons are clear but uncomfortable. The first is that economics cannot outpace politics. Unity built on rules without shared purpose will always strain under crisis. The second is that debt without sovereignty is dependency. Nations that cannot print their own currency are forever at the mercy of markets. And the third is that every monetary system, from gold to fiat to digital, survives only as long as trust does. When faith breaks, numbers follow. The euro experiment continues, resilient yet fragile, an achievement that dared to challenge history but could not escape it. It proved that shared money can bind nations, but it also proved that money alone cannot create unity. The dream that Europe could transcend its past through economics remains alive, but tested by every shock. Whether the next crisis strengthens the Union or exposes its limits will depend on the same force that created it in the first place: belief. If this story made you see currency differently, subscribe to Economic Collapse. Because every system built on trust eventually discovers what happens when trust runs out.